Welcome to another episode of the College Nook podcast. Today I'm speaking with my dear friend and colleague, Michelle Ruiz. Michelle, like me, is an academic advisor at a university. She had an interesting path that led her to pursue a career in higher education. During this episode, we talk about the complexities of remote learning and teaching and what students should do in their first year in college. Michelle also shares her academic and career exploration journey as a first-gen college student. We discuss the dilemma that many students face when choosing their major, finding your true passion versus pursuing a major so you can get a job, pay bills, and provide for the family, and how first-gen college identity plays into it. As always, thank you for listening. Please subscribe to the College Nook podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, or another platform of your choice. Enjoy. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about our path to becoming academic advisors. And so I know you have a very interesting journey to higher education. And I'd like you to start by maybe sharing a little bit about your educational background when it comes to your undergraduate degree, graduate degree, and then maybe share with us those situations or experiences that led you into higher education.
Yeah. So I started my undergraduate program as an astronomy major. When I was a kid, instead of dreaming about being an academic advisor, I wanted to be a meteorologist. And so I was really passionate about weather, and I still am. But the school that I wanted to go to didn't have that program. So I was like, okay, I still like space. So I'm just going to try out their astronomy program and see what happens. And so I remember starting off my classes, and I started with like math that was maybe a little bit more advanced than I thought I was ready for, but I did okay. And then I remember joining a student organization, or just kind of going to the first meeting and seeing what it felt like. And it was a student organization for undergraduates interested in astronomy. And I'm really glad I did that, because I did not like it. Like, it just felt weird, and like, I don't know, the people weren't, like, the other students weren't that nice or welcoming, so it just didn't feel right. And then on top of that, I'm not a big math person, which is debatable. Looking back on it, the potential is definitely there, but I don't think I had that push by an academic advisor to be like, yeah, you could do it. These are the resources and everything. Because when I did go to talk to my advisor, they're like, oh yeah, you need to do up to calculus 3 by next summer. And I was only in pre-calculus, and I was already freaking out. And so I started to really doubt my path. So I ended up going back to another academic advisor, because it was like a general advising office. And I told them what I liked. So I mentioned weather, but then I mentioned the math part. And he was like, oh, what about geography? And I was like, what do you mean? Because in my mind, I was like, oh, maps and capitals. Like, that's not what I want to do. And he's like, right. And he's like, no, there's more to it. And so he told me about this physical geography class. He's like, you could try it out in the summer and see how it goes. And I fell in love with it. I was like, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. So I completed, I completed my undergraduate degree in geography. And it just felt really great, because I finally found something.
Yeah. And that's interesting, because you go to college with this idea of doing one major, pursuing one path, and then you stumble upon something else. You try and you're like, oh, and that's exactly the exploration that I have in mind, like for students, right? You do one thing, you try it, do you like it? Do you not like it? But before I wanted to ask you one more question because I know that you are a proud first generation college student in the US, right?
Hmm.
And I wanted to ask you, when it came to making that decision to go to college, for you, was it a decision, a conscious decision? Was it the family expectation? Was it more like, oh, society tells me I should go to college? Where were you at, like after high school or in high school? I'm curious.
That's a really good question because I don't have that memory of like, oh, I
Mm,
need to do this. It was never on really on my radar, but I knew that I had to do something else after high
mhm,
school to be successful in the
mhm,
U.S. And so my friend who was always like she's still a really close friend of mine, like one of my best friends. Like she was always the one like on top of things, doing all the AP classes. She's like, "Oh, have you applied to college yet?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Yeah, like you need to be doing that now." And it was around my junior year, so that's when I
mhm,
started freaking out because I had no idea because my parents didn't know either. They didn't know the
mhm,
timeline. They just
mhm.
figured, "Oh, Michelle's gonna figure it out. Someone's gonna tell her."
Yeah.
We don't, they didn't have to be involved. So that was kind of a shock to my system when I learned that.
And so you didn't even learn that from some high school counselor. It was your friend that kind of mentioned that to you. And that's
Mm-hmm.
interesting because I feel like it's the same story that my husband, Kyle, mentions to me. He was in his senior year, and in his case, it wasn't the friend that was a high school counselor that said, Kyle, why didn't you register to take SATs or whatever, ACTs? And he's
Mm-hmm.
like, why would I do that? You need that for
Yeah.
college admissions. Oh, I need to apply to college already? You know, it's like sometimes
Mm-hmm.
when your family members are not guiding you through the process, or you don't have immediate, let's say, older siblings who are doing it, it becomes difficult to kind of navigate this path. And so
Mm-hmm.
we have then friends, high school counselors who kind of help us through that journey.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like it wasn't a must for you, but you knew you wanted to do something else after high school, and college was that choice. And you went to a 4 year school right away.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did.
Okay. So now your geography journey is happening. What's next?
So it was, I've always really liked school and being in school and school
Yeah.
supplies. And you and I chat about the perfect pen all the time. And so school always came up as a next natural step, like it did for undergrad. So the same thing was with graduate school. And at
Mhm,
this point, like through my senior seminar, I had learned about the different paths. So either going on to graduate school or developing the skills that I would need to go to the workforce. And they actually had me do a really good assignment where I had to interview grad students in the program. And so that really helped me because it helped me get an idea and a sense of what it really takes and what you really need, not only academically but personally, to make the decision to go to grad school because it's a really big commitment.
mhm,
And so out of my options, it felt like the most natural step for me to take.
mhm. And your graduate program, at that point in time, was it easy for you to decide, I'm just going to continue going more in depth with geography, or did you choose something else?
I just continued on the same track. And so
Mhm.
I just picked four schools that I went online, I did my research. Another thing that was important was like, where do I see myself living?
Yeah.
Because you're going to be there for the next 2 to 4 and who knows how many years. So I picked areas that I knew that I would be comfortable in, and then kind of weighed the options between the departments and then applied to the ones that appealed to me.
Mhm, mhm. So it sounds like you're a lifelong learner. You're like, yes, undergraduate, yes, graduate school, what's next? And it sounds like you wanted to be in school environment because it's enriching and fulfilling. But I'm still not hearing higher education as like, oh, I want to be an advisor. When did that happen?
Well, that did happen a little bit later, but like my first taste of it, in a sense, was when I was a teaching assistant for my graduate program. So
Mm-hmm.
that was my first interaction with students, holding office hours for my class. I taught a physical geography lab.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was kind of that first, I guess, something that actually made me feel like I could believe in myself to be able to be in that position. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
really know what to call it, but it was a very significant moment in my life. And so from teaching, I went on to tutoring in the same subject. And
Mm-hmm.
so from tutoring, and I tutored student athletes at my grad school. And then I became an academic mentor for student athletes. And at this point, it expanded beyond my subject field. So I actually had like a tiny caseload of like 5 students, and
Mm-hmm.
then kind of mentoring them academically, going over study skills,
Mm-hmm.
test prep skills. So it's like I secretly started becoming an advisor,
Yeah.
but not even knowing that was
Yeah.
happening.
Was that part of your position that they gave you those 5 students, or you just sought that opportunity or like took the opportunity?
I sought that opportunity
Okay.
because I
And that's
started,
funny
yeah.
because, yeah, I was going to mention that that's how my exploration of academic advising as a profession started as well. I, I was applying for graduate assistantships in graduate program that are more in line with what I already knew, which was
Mm-hmm.
assist international students
Mm-hmm.
or promote study abroad. Those two were natural for me. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
student advocate for international student side and also go explore. It's so awesome out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I knew I had up to 5 offices to apply to. And so
Mm-hmm.
I applied to academic advising as well, not even knowing what that is, because when I
Mm-hmm.
went for 1 year in the US, I had a faculty advisor. They won't be listening to this podcast, I'm very sure. But when I met with them, they just told me what classes to take, gave me the list, and I left the office. I was like,
Right.
oh, okay. So I didn't really know what I was signing up for. And then I had interviews and I got the position for the advising office. And same way, I had a caseload of 5 students that I was mentoring throughout the semester. In my particular case, those were students who had certain academic challenges, and we were also working on study skills and time management strategies.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I'm going to be an international student advisor. And then I was like,
Right.
oh, this is kind of awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how did you kind of expand on that opportunity? Did you have a chance to coach several semesters, or like, how did you ensure in your mind that this is the right path for you?
Right. I just really enjoyed it. And because at that time I was still completing my graduate degree, so it was really a part time job to help supplement my stipend. And so I just really enjoyed the connections that I was building. And I, at the time, I didn't realize, like, oh, I'm working with a special student population too.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just, building those connections and supporting students and knowing that, they were well on their way to doing other things, and I was part of that journey. Like that just really, really made me
Mm-hmm.
happy. Like I found it felt good. And something that I like learned from chatting with someone else earlier this week is that sometimes like the words can't come to your mouth or your brain right away, but your body usually feels it.
Mm-hmm.
So like I just remember like it always felt right.
Yeah.
So I knew that I was on the right path. While when I would reflect back on like my thesis work, or I was working on my thesis, it didn't feel good anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
had that kind of like a compass to kind of direct me to the right path. And that's what led me to applying for an academic advisor position once I saw it.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Sometimes, my hope is that a lot of students are listening to these
Mm-hmm.
conversations, and I just want to kind of also share that back home in Ukraine, when I'm in college, there is zero academic support. There is zero resources available. It's kind of all on you. And when I came to the US for that 1 year, yes, you pay for it with fees. Yes, you
Mm-hmm.
have a higher tuition. Well, if that's the case, if you're already making that investment into your future, tuition, fees, all of that good stuff, then go ahead and take advantage of it. And guess
Mm-hmm.
what? The majority of people that are working in higher education, they enjoy it. They enjoy working with students. And so I always want to emphasize the fact that the students should use the resources. And academic advisors
Mm-hmm.
is one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Because I mean, we end up knowing so many different things because we're exposed to it. We're this liaison between so many different offices, and we build connections not only with students but with other members of the university or institution. So you can always have someone in the back of your mind like, oh, I can reach out to so and so about your test scores coming in, or about
Mhm.
your application, or about whatever financial aid it can be, because you end up
Mhm.
being this person who knows so much about how the system works, and it's so
Mhm.
great to have that, especially as a first gen student, when
Yeah.
it's already overwhelming enough trying to navigate your classes, let alone trying to learn how to learn in college.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's kind of awesome because you just mentioned first gen students, and I wanted to go back to that topic because, seeing how we both worked at institutions with a lot of first gen college students,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm curious to hear your opinion right now as you are working with first gen students. What are some of the things they need to be paying attention to? What are some of the things that they should do to help themselves during their first year or two in college? Like, what are the things that you usually recommend to students?
Definitely to get connected, to their professors, to their advisors, to their department somehow, and to other students. It can be difficult, especially like where we work together, as a commuter campus. It's really difficult to build that community, but community and engagement is so important because you're able to find motivation when you need it, and sometimes information when you don't have it. Someone else might casually bring it up, kind of like how in high school, like how Kyle and I found out about applying to college. But definitely connecting with professors, and it's never too early to start those connections, because they might be the founding like step to your next move. So it's important to start that.
Yeah. I think a lot of times of that human connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I ask my students, it could be any human you want, right? Could be an advisor, could be professor, could be your peer, could be an
Mm-hmm.
upperclassman. Just find the person that you can trust, that you can ask a question. If they don't know, they'll at least guide you into the right direction. And
Mm-hmm.
this semester has been weird in that regard because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the students that are starting their college journey, they zoom in and then click end the meeting or leave the meeting, and that's it. And so I worry so much about their experience going through college, their first semester, and whether it's going to impact how they do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I almost feel that way for anyone because when we go to campus, we get to be in class in the hallway. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, that's an interesting way to solve the problem. Tell me
Mm-hmm.
more, or whatever. Or did you buy? Where did you buy your
Right.
textbook? Um, yeah. What are your thoughts on the whole remote teaching and learning? And do you feel like it's going to be detrimental to the students, or is there a way to sort of salvage the situation?
That's a really, really good question. I definitely think that it just makes things that much harder, because then everything, even if it's like a synchronous, like a live class where you're still seeing the instructor, a lot of that learning falls on you
Mm-hmm.
at home, on the student at home. So it just requires that initiative that's really scary at first. And
Mm-hmm.
so to reach out, and getting doing that first step is so much more intimidating because you can't see the person, you can't see their body language, you can't get a feel for them, and it's also harder to find them because if you're walking down the hallway and you see your professor in their office, they're not doing anything, they're on their computer, they're in their natural habitat. It might be easier to be like, oh hey, Dr. So and so, can I ask you a quick question? And kind of just like getting over the fear and just doing it and being brave, as opposed to sending a chat or doing Zoom, because at first Zoom is really complicated to figure out. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
just, you're learning so much, not only academically, that it can just be like this really overwhelming time. And maybe with time it will be better. But I mean, I really thrive personally on human connection. So I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it would be really hard to overcome that quickly.
Yeah, that's very true. Like, I remember when I was taking my math class not so long
Mm-hmm.
ago, right? I had questions and I had to walk to my professor's office and ask questions. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go ask questions. How does this work? But then I was
Mm-hmm.
like, no, I preach this to my students. I should do it and experience it. And it is tough. And in that particular case, as a student, I had no clue what questions
Mm-hmm.
to ask because I was so lost.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
yet, and this is an important piece for me as an educator and advisor. I noticed that it's very important to ensure that the educator is there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what I mean by that, the personality, the willingness to help and care for student success. I was in a situation where that was the case, and I sat down. I was like, I don't know where to even start. I have no idea what's going on here. I don't have any specific questions. Can we just start from scratch?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also hearing kind of very sad stories of folks saying, down the hall, oh, you're stupid. You should know this and that. And it's just very disappointing since we are in the building of education and learning and lifelong learning. And it's just like kind of like doesn't align really well.
Mm-hmm.
So it really
Right.
depends on the culture, on the personalities. And to be honest with you, if we're being really honest here, sometimes at orientation, when we do the presentation, like reach out to your professors, they're here to help. I kind of second, I don't feel that confident anymore because not everybody's in the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And that's the one piece that I don't know how to navigate as an advisor. If I tell everyone, go and see your teachers and professors, and then they have a horrible experience, how does that impact their overall success in college? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's really complicated because you don't know what to expect. I think that's where, as an advisor, it helps to know the faculty, because then
Mhm.
if you have an idea of who is probably more open or more student centered in their teaching, and then you can refer someone to specific instructor. But I mean, that reminds me, even down to advisors, it can be the same thing. And so you can have a student who doesn't necessarily have a great experience. And then they're like,
Mhm.
okay, well, I guess I'm just on my own and I'll figure out how to graduate, and, I'll just follow the checklist. And there's
Mhm.
so many little details that they might miss because of a bad experience. And so it just
Right.
gets really complicated to really, I think it goes beyond our scope of things. And I'm not really sure if there is an answer. But
Yeah.
but yeah, it's really critical, if you are in a student centered position, that you feel passionate about it. because
Mm-hmm.
it's for the student at at the end of the day, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. And let me go back to one kind of point in our conversation earlier, when we touched on exploration process, right? How
Hmm.
you took this class and then you joined that club and then you took another class, and like the whole process of exploration. I wanted to focus on that piece for the rest of our little chat,
Hmm.
and maybe kind of brainstorm best practices. Like, what do we typically advise students that they should do when they're exploring their path, right? And here's why: because when you were starting college, you would never imagine or guess that you would be an advisor. But now that
Hmm.
you're in this role, you're enjoying it, you're loving it, and there's always kind of a room to give more, to coach more, to be better in certain techniques when it comes to talking to students. So, like, I feel like we are in the right, like, lifelong learning
Hmm.
profession. I just wanted to kind of get your opinion and maybe some of your advice to students when it comes to exploration.
Hmm. Right. So I like to start with asking the students what they like. I think it's also important to give boundaries, because if you can, it's kind of like trying to choose what you want to eat for dinner. Sometimes knowing you have so many options can be so overwhelming that it's like, oh, I don't know what I want to eat. I'll just have pizza again, because
Yeah.
it's the safe option. So definitely, I think it helps to kind of frame things in a smaller piece, and then giving options from within that piece, or asking different interests that the student may have. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's where general studies are really important, because they are already broken up
Mm-hmm.
into different subjects. It's like, okay, well, I know that I don't like history that much, but I really like arts and humanities. So you could focus in on that. And then within that, there's so many different types of courses that it can be easy. And it also counts towards a degree. So it's not like you're wasting your credits in that way while you explore, because I feel like that can sometimes be um, like a barrier to students, where it's like, well, I can't just spend a whole semester and all this money just trying to figure it out. Or maybe it's someone else in the student's life, like a family member or any support system, who brings that up. But definitely just kind of, I think it's really important to do what you like,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, it really motivates you. And just kind of merging what you like and what you're passionate about, and trying to merge
Mm-hmm.
those two.
I've been, no matter what major or department I work for,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's engineering, business, or sciences, there's always that population of students that chooses the major because of the career prospects. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, well, good for you. You'll be just making money. But then 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, and so on and so forth. Here's kind of another question slash dilemma that I always have, and I don't think I have an answer to it just yet, but there is this big push in the US on find your passion, find what you're passionate about, while in countries in Europe, more than the ones that I know of, at least in Germany, um, I know in Italy, in France, they focus more on what are you good at, how can you use those skills to get a education slash job, and then you can do your hobbies on the side. And
Mm-hmm.
to expand on this, I wanted to say, because there's always this fine line. I like drawing. Do you like drawing enough to do it every day, all day? But
Mm-hmm.
also, do you have limitations when it comes to becoming a better drawer or painter or whatever artist? Like, I don't know. So I said a bunch of things just because I want to like feed the conversation with this kind of dichotomy between find your
Mm-hmm.
passion And then I say this to a student who is working while going to school, their parents are working, you know, countless hours to feed the family, and I tell them, find the passion. Do you hear how that sounds to them?
Yeah.
No, I want to
Mm-hmm.
find a job that will feed and provide for my family. So,
Mm-hmm.
as a person who is passionate about first gen college students, and a lot of which come from disadvantaged backgrounds, how do you approach these conversations?
That's a really great question because it reminds me of something that's commonly said to students in higher ed about failure, about, oh, it's okay if you fail. Just study harder next time. And for students, like you were just describing, where it's like, the student has to take on another job because maybe the parent's business went down, especially during a pandemic. And there's so much pressure that you're right. Um, there's no, it feels like there's almost no space for that passion and what you really want to do. Um, because at that point, failure is not an option. Because if you fail, things can go like your livelihood is at stake and more in that
Hmm.
situation. Um, so it's definitely more challenging. And I don't think there's a really easy answer to it because if if you're not really invested or motivated, then your path is going to be really challenging. And for things like the doctor, lawyer, things that are like traditionally viewed, especially in other countries and other cultures, as like the top careers. I know coming from Colombia, it's like, oh, you're going to be like an engineer, doctor, lawyer. Those are all like very lucrative positions. That when I bring up I'm an academic advisor to my family, they're like, well, what is that? Like, are you going to survive off of that? Because that's the main priority, right? It's not like, oh, are you passionate about it? Um,
Yeah.
so it's really tricky, but also having that drive to get to the other side, because sometimes being into something is what ultimately helps you push past the late nights where you're studying the applications for medical school, for example, and getting through things like medical school. So that's really tough to navigate. I think that's where it helps to have that relationship with the student and build that relationship and that trust to really know what's going on.
And I like to be devil's advocate. So sometimes I'm like feeling that one way, the other day. Like, so
Mm-hmm.
for example, sometimes I'm like, no, this whole rhetoric about find your passion is crap. Let's just get rid of it. Other
Yeah.
times I'm like, no, but this is what makes people happy. We should, pursue that. And then I think back to a lot of my friends, classmates from the university, from high school back home in Ukraine. And I think of a lot of them, they go to college because it's the next thing that they should do. They
Mm-hmm.
collect diplomas, post them on the wall, and then never touch them and never do anything related to their degree. And they often pursue like law school, international economic relations,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. And then, well, guess what? I love baking. I'm gonna bake cakes and open my own bakery. And oh my gosh, I cannot find a happier person. Like, honestly, this is the person I'm thinking of from my university. Another example, they found that they have this love for cooking, and they found
Mm-hmm.
and opened their little coffee shop with like different pastries and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, it's easy in Ukraine to open such a thing, such a little business, I think, for the most part. Um, but then also, I wonder if we started with that when they are 16 or 18 and let them do this thing, they might have been even further ahead. Question mark,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I don't know, because college experience is an experience in itself. It gives you something, but I'm just
Mm-hmm.
curious if we were to explore those interests and passions without the necessity of going to pursue a traditional 4-year degree. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know.
Because then maybe they could have. shifted their focus to hone in on those skills. And like you were saying, combining what you're good at, because that's important, and also what you like, and then finding something from there. But
Yeah.
it's challenging, and it's really, to me, it really impresses me when someone's able to find that spot,
Hmm.
because it's
Hmm.
rare or it takes a while.
Hmm. And sometimes I feel like young students have so much pressure to figure out what they want to do, and I'm looking at myself
Mm-hmm.
at 33 and thinking I don't even know what I'm doing.
Right.
Relax. It's all going to be good.
Right. Yeah.
It's all a journey. We are not
Mm-hmm.
looking for a destination. Yeah. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to get any more philosophical, but I
I
did
was ready.
have I do have a question that I'm aiming to ask all of my guests at the end of the episode. And it's kind of interesting for me to see what you all respond, right?
Mm-hmm.
Regarding the college experience. And so the question is, could you identify one or two most impactful experiences, events, people, whatever that is in your college experience that you feel like set you on a successful journey or changed the course or something very impactful, and what it was for you?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. For my undergraduate, it was definitely my professors. I think once I got to know them and I would visit their office hours, like I could see what they did, and it kind of confirmed that I was on the right path. And they also pushed me, like if there was an award, it's like, oh, you should apply for this. And knowing that someone believes in you and sees that in you, is really powerful when it's hard for someone sometimes to see it within themselves. But then it shifted for me in grad school, where it was my colleagues, my cohort. I still talk to some people to this day, and we started together 10 years ago, which is wild to believe. But kind of going through this journey together really bonds people. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think it depends on where you're at and what you're
Yeah,
doing. Hmm.
absolutely. Well, so far, I definitely am seeing a trend with the answers. It seems like there is always this one person or two people that will notice you or see potential in you,
Hmm.
something to that extent. And then it makes the world and it changes how you view yourself. And I
Hmm.
think that's so important for students. And I hope that every student will find somebody like that for them, whether
Hmm.
it's in the classroom or outside of the classroom, because again, could be anyone, right? Like you mentioned,
Hmm. Right.
colleagues or professors.
Hmm. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I don't want to make this ending very formal, but I'm sure I'll have you on this podcast once more in the future once I get a hold of things and understand better how to do this thing called interview or conversation. But thanks so much, Michelle. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's always great talking with you.